This is exactly the kind of information and an analysis that whoever gets elected president really does need to get going in this time of extraordinary challenges, but at the same time, I'd say in clean energy, some big opportunities. So thank you, David, for putting this all together. So, as some of you know, I don't go anywhere without my favorite triangle, the sustainable energy triangle. If we're going to get to a more sustainable energy future, it's about technology, policy, and finance. If you want to work on technology and clean energy, you better understand something about policy and finance. If you're a policy person in Washington, you better understand something about technology and finance. So these really do need to be integrated if we're going to get to where we need to get to. Let me start with how not to get started. If we're going to deal with climate change, this is my favorite cartoon. Only the New Yorker can put climate change and gun control together in the same cartoon. So, this panel is about financing clean energy, and particularly what should the next president do. So I want to start with a kind of a complicated slide, but that's because clean energy investment is a rather complicated area. This is kind of a prototypical chart that traces the entire path of some kinds of clean energy technology. This might be big hardware leading to a new wind turbine or a new carbon capture unit or any number of things. It starts, no surprise, with basic research brought to you by the federal government. Applied research, more of the same. Nancy's world, the world of venture, begins to creep in at that point, moving things out of the lab and into a startup. Then we get to these big areas where we've got to jump from the initial technology in the lab to a demo, from a demo to a large initial scale-up project, and then to a second one. That's where the world of private equity comes in to help fuel that growth. And ultimately, what we've got to get to, we start with innovation, we move to commercialization. Ultimately, we've got to get to large-scale deployment, and that's a mix of equity and debt. That's measured in the not millions of dollars, but the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. So a quick look at how we think about the development of these across the financing spectrum. The good news is that the president, the next president, has many tools at her disposal. From things at this early stage, innovation, federal R&D funding, the Advanced Research Project Agency for Energy that sits inside DOE, grants, loan guarantees, tax credits Nancy mentioned, these so-called tax advantage structures, master limited partnerships, real estate investment trusts, private activity bonds. These are things authorized by the Congress that have some specific tax advantages to them. Federal procurement, what the federal government itself can buy. And then OPIC, and to the extent we have EXIM around, helping people move their technologies from this country overseas. And then the big three in terms of policy, EPA's Clean Power Plan, fuel economy standards, and energy efficiency standards. So let's quickly walk through that innovation, commercialization, and deployment spectrum. Comes to R&D, the big important piece is, in fact, mission innovation, as Arun talked about briefly this morning. Doubling federal R&D spending over the next 5 years. The U.S. and 19 other nations, this would be a big increase from about $6 billion to almost $13 billion in 2021. Multiple agencies, although the biggest piece of that is the Department of Energy. And it is a heavy lift. I have to disagree to some extent with Secretary Schultz. When Secretary Moniz announced the proposal to double over 5 years, I wouldn't say that was heartily embraced on Capitol Hill. This is going to be a real heavy lift, and I think that's going to be a challenge at this level of R&D for the next president. Turning quickly to commercialization, one of the big tools has been the loan guarantee program, put into place in a series of laws, actually. There's 3 different loan guarantee programs, but they finally, all 3 of them got financed during the financial crisis by the Congress. $35 billion to date of loan guarantees issued. across a whole range of technologies, transportation-related technologies, power technologies, and it's been a very good investment. Estimated losses, just 2%. 90% of the so-called loan loss reserve is still there and available. Unfortunately, when we talk about this program, we talk about Solyndra, the S word. But what we don't talk about, Nancy referenced, is a company like Tesla. Tesla's factory here in Silicon Valley was helped by a $465 million loan guarantee, paid back 10 years early. This is a good, strong program. And the thing that most people don't realize is we've got $40 billion in remaining authority. Having said that, the current program, moving that money out the door, is not a simple matter. And so one of the challenges for the next president is, in fact, to reinvigorate this loan guarantee program. Another piece of commercialization are grants, federal grants for energy across nuclear, renewables, fossil, including carbon capture, a whole host of things where billions of dollars move out of the federal government, to a large extent the Department of Energy, and are put in the hands of people moving these technologies into the field and deploying them at scale. But there are big challenges. This is a simple example of floating offshore wind technologies. On the order of $150 million of grants have been announced, but a relatively small percentage of that has actually been spent. These companies trying to move this technology forward have had challenges. Ultimately, I think it's a very, very important technology. Ultimately, it's going to work. It's going to come down the cost curve, but this has been tough. Same thing with carbon capture and storage technologies. Lots of announcements, but just a couple of weeks ago, a $350 million grant made to a project in Texas was pulled back. That's not going to get spent. So, challenge for the next president, tuning up these clean energy grant programs. All right, let's move to deployment. Some talk about the clean trillion. It's an interesting phrase, and it does capture something rather important, which is that total global investment in clean energy today is on the order of about $300 billion. A simple analysis suggests that if we're going to stay within this 2 degrees centigrade increase in global temperatures, we've got to pretty quickly be moving to about $1 trillion a year in investment in clean energy globally. You can dispute these numbers, but I think the bottom line is we got to put a lot more money to work, and quickly, if we're going to have any shot. The big money is not in the federal government. The big money is not in venture firms, which deal with that early stage. The big money is in these major institutions. Not trillions, but tens of trillions. Pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, foundations, endowments, family offices. A big challenge for the next president is how to help unlock these trillions of dollars. And there's a lot of ways that we can do it. One of those ways is, in fact, through the incentives that the federal government can provide for clean energy. You can move private sector capital into the deployment of clean energy if you provide some incentives. That's what, for example, the tax credits are about. Lots of progress of late with tax credits. As most of you know, both the wind and the solar tax credits have been extended for about 5 years. There are some have-nots who either didn't get an extension or only got a minimal one. Geothermal, biomass, fuel cells, combined heat and power. And even the ones that have gotten an extension, wind and solar, those are going to start to ramp down, in the case of wind to zero, in the case of solar down to about 10%. So the question is, over the long haul, as these phase down, what else can we be doing? And that's what these tax advantage structures are about. Master limited partnerships have been used for $500 billion worth of investment in oil and gas pipelines. A tax advantage structure. There's pending legislation on Capitol Hill right now to open up the master limited partnership law to renewables, to efficiency, to carbon capture, to a whole host, to storage, a whole host of technologies. Real estate investment trusts. Those have been extended beyond real estate to things like cell towers and billboards. We've argued cell tower kind of looks like a wind turbine minus the blades. Why aren't we extending real estate investment trusts to wind turbines? In fact, there's a pending proposal sitting at the Treasury Department right now take and comment, and the president could do that tomorrow, could open up REITs to renewables, put something else like that. Private activity bonds, $100 billion worth of those were used to clean up air pollution in the United States at power plants, putting on capture units for particulates. We've said, all right, we did it in the 70s and 80s to capture particulates. Let's do it in this decade to capture carbon. So a nice bipartisan bill introduced a few months ago in the Senate just to do that. Let's open that one up. So the challenge, though, is getting these things done. The president establishing reliable long-term federal investment mechanisms for clean energy. Governor Granholm today said the states are important. They're key partners. We've really got to stress that. We've got to move beyond the battle over the Clean Power Plan and realize there are some real productive cooperative relationships with the state. Andy Karsner's home state of Texas. One doesn't always think about that as a leading renewable energy state, but far and away the most wind developed in the U.S. has been in Texas, close to 20,000 megawatts. They've built 3,500 miles of transmission lines in Texas. We can barely cite 1 mile in the rest of the country. And $7 billion worth of investment in those transmission lines. So there are lots of ways, as Governor Granholm said, to sit down with these states and their 50 public utility commissions and their 50 legislatures to jointly work out how we're going to do well and how we're going to do good when it comes to clean energy in this country under the next administration. And I think that's a very exciting option for the next president. Quick case study, carbon capture and sequestration. I tend to think that ultimately we're going to have to be using more of it, on industrial facilities, potentially on natural gas power plants. The good news is that the technology has come along pretty nicely. The less good news is that we're still pretty challenged from a financial standpoint. And so there's lots of mechanisms that are either on the books now or being talked about, and that is this long list. One of the challenges is to take a comprehensive approach. Too much in this country will propose an incentive over here, a loan guarantee over there, a tax credit there, and we're not taking the sort of integrated, comprehensive approach to each of these vital technology when it comes to public policy, when it comes to financial incentives. So I think that's a real opportunity and a real challenge at the same time for the next president. And by the way, for those of you who don't know what POTUS means, I realize I didn't explain that. Inside the Beltway, the POTUS is the President of the United States. The VPOTUS is the Vice President of the United States. And there's all of these acronyms. I should have said that from the beginning. Now you know what the POTUS challenge is. So, finally, the next president's not-so-secret weapon, federal energy use. The federal government, our government, is the single largest energy user on the planet. $23 billion annually is what our government spends. 400,000 buildings, 400,000 non-tactical vehicles, add a lot more if you include a lot of Pentagon vehicles, 640 million acres of land, more than 25% of U.S. real estate. I didn't understand this a couple of years ago. The federal government owns 50,000 miles of transmission lines. Huge owner of transmission lines in the western U.S. And the Department of Defense and the General Services Administrations have established energy technology test beds. They're doing extraordinary things to test important technologies in the federal context and help spin them out, both inside the U.S. government, but also to industry. And the president has got a lot of tools when it comes to his or her ownership of the largest energy complex in the world. Procurement, buying gigawatts of green electricity, which the 3 military services are now doing. Finance, some financing mechanisms to actually get energy projects built across the federal system. Eminent domain, a tool we need to site transmission, and the power marketing administrations, Bonneville Power, the Western Area Power Administration, which own these massive transmission systems. So, to wrap up, the next president is going to have many tools, many tools, but many challenges at the same time. But I think the good news is that I think we can wrestle many of these challenges, and in the end, both do well and do good when it comes to clean energy and climate. So thanks very much.